Anub'Arak is the fifth and final boss of the Trial of the Crusader. This encounter consists of 3 phases and has a 10-minute enrage timer. We'll first discuss the normal version. This fight boils down to having good ad management and raid positioning. Phase 1 is a ground phase, where Anub'Arak is targetable. This phase lasts 90 seconds. Phase 2 is the burrow phase, where Anub'Arak is untargetable and immune to damage. Phase 2 lasts 60 seconds. Phase 1 and 2 alternate until the boss reaches 30% health, at which point Phase 3 begins and will persist until the end of the fight. Let's start with Phase 1. While grounded, Anub'Arak will use the following abilities. Freezing Slash. Inflicts 25% Frost Strike damage, frost or physical, whichever will cause more damage, to the primary target, and freezes them in a block of ice for 3 seconds. Anub'Arak already melees pretty hard, so healers be mindful to watch the tank while frozen. Penetrating Cold. A debuff cast on 5 random players that deals 3,500 damage, or 6,000 damage in Heroic, every 3 seconds for 18 seconds. Once this falls off the first 5 players, another 5 will be afflicted. Lastly, Submerge. Anub'Arak uses Submerge to burrow into the ground and begin Phase 2. This ability will not be used during Phase 3. During Phase 1 and over the course of the entire fight, Permafrost orbs will spawn above the raid. They have 9,000 health and float around in the room. Once killed by a ranged DPS, they drop down and leave a patch of permafrost on the ground, slowing movement speed by 80%. The permafrost is a key mechanic for this fight, and we'll discuss why shortly. Next, 2 Nerubian burrowers will spawn shortly after the start of Phase 1, and 2 more will spawn after 45 seconds, amounting to 4 adds over the course of the phase. These need to be picked up by either 1 or 2 off-tanks. These adds have 750,000 health, melee for about 3,500, and have access to the following abilities. Submerge. Attempts to burrow underground and heal to full. This is an uninterruptible cast, but can be stunned or cancelled if the add is tanked over a patch of permafrost. Hence, tanks should aim to position these adds on top of a patch of permafrost. Expose Weakness. Often applied on a melee swing, this ability increases physical damage taken by 25%, stacking up to 9 times. Nerubian burrowers also have a short-range aura that increases the melee haste and movement speed for other nearby burrowers. Much like in Ulduar, how Ariaya's Sanctum sentries buff each other. This aura, in combination with Exposed Weakness, means it's dangerous for one tank to hold multiple adds for an extended period of time. If you have a tank that can navigate their defensives well, and your raid utilizes stuns, one tank can reliably hold 2 adds. However, this is considerably more risky, and in general, I would recommend running 3 tanks for this fight, such that the adds can be separated, meaning one tank is on Anub'Arak, while the other 2 tanks are on add duty. For Phase 1, have your main tank face Anub'Arak away from the raid. Have off-tanks pick up the Nerubian burrowers and tank them on top of a patch of permafrost. Ideally position the burrowers such that they're on either side of the boss and can be cleaved without buffing each other. Ranged DPS want to enable this positioning, so try to DPS permafrost orbs down accordingly, such that they allow for this configuration. Death Knights can alternatively grip the permafrost orbs down. If this arrangement isn't possible, however, it's generally more important for off-tanks to tank their add on a patch of permafrost than it is to enable cleave. Lastly, ranged DPS and healers can stand wherever, as long as they're behind the boss. After 90 seconds, Anub'Arak will submerge, and Phase 2 will begin. This is a good time to finish off any remaining burrowers. Because of the 10-minute range timer, DPS may want to prioritize boss damage during Phase 1. As a general rule of thumb, aim to finish off the first set of burrowers before the second set spawns, then leave the second set to be finished off during Phase 2. Depending on how comfortable your tanks are, you may opt to leave all 4 adds alive until Phase 2. During Phase 2, the boss now has access to the following abilities. Pursued by Anub'Arak. You're being pursued. Pursuing Spikes. Fires spikes to the floor as Anub'Arak moves around. As a non-pursued target, standing in these spikes deals 3,000 damage and knocks you up in the air. Impale. When Anub'Arak reaches his target, he will use this spell, dealing 20,000 physical damage to anyone within 6 yards. This attack cannot penetrate permafrost. Lastly, Summoning Scarab. A swarm scarab emerges from the ground. Pursued targets need to stand on top of permafrost before Anub'Arak reaches them, otherwise they will take borderline lethal damage from Impale. It is impossible to indefinitely outrun this ability, as the spikes will slowly speed up. Thus, pursued raiders must stand on the ground with permafrost. If Anub'Arak reaches their target while in permafrost, the impale cast will be cancelled and the boss will pursue another target and the permafrost ground will disappear. Note that immunities like Blessing of Protection will work, but Anub'Arak will continue to pursue the same target through the immunity, meaning the only way to have the boss swap targets is to get hit by impale or stand in permafrost. Of course, the latter of which being the favorable outcome. During this phase, ranged DPS need to ensure they continue to DPS down permafrost orbs, such that pursued players have permafrost ground they could run to when pursued. While this is happening, swarm scarabs will regularly spawn. These bugs have 100,000 health and will fixate on a random player. They don't melee very hard, but they do apply a nasty dot that stacks. It's important that DPS nuke these scarabs down as fast as possible to prevent the stacks from getting too high. They can additionally be kited with slows and stuns, but bear in mind the scarabs have a random chance to gain the buff Determination, healing the scarab to full and becoming slow and stun immune. If this happens, be sure to DPS the scarab down. After 60 seconds, Anub'Arak will emerge and phase 1 will repeat. Phases 1 and 2 will cycle through until the boss reaches 30% health, at which point phase 3 will begin. It's advised to finish off any remaining adds before pushing the boss to 30% health. Once phase 3 begins, Nerubian burrowers stop spawning, and Anub'Arak gains the ability Leeching Swarm. This leeches 10% of each target's current health every second and heals the boss with that damage. Leeching Swarm will leech no less than 250 health from a target. Since the leech only affects your current health value, healers don't want to keep the raid at 100% health, otherwise the boss will heal large amounts and you won't be able to DPS Anub'Arak down before your healers run out of mana. Instead, we want the raid to have as little health as possible to reduce the amount of health Anub'Arak leeches, while still being healthy enough to be kept alive. Keeping raid members around 20 to 30% health is a good mark to shoot for. The exception to this rule applies to the main tank, who needs to be at or near 100% health most of the time, and raid members with the debuff Penetrating Cold. If left unhealed, raiders at 20 to 30% health will likely die after 2 ticks of the debuff, or 6 seconds. To help phase 3 healing, be sure to utilize Nature Resistance Totem or Aspect of the Wild to reduce Leeching Swarm damage. Additionally, passive healing effects like Judgment of Light, Improved Leader of the Pact, and Healing Stream Totem are very powerful here. Once DPS and healers reach a low enough amount of health, the passive healing from these effects will create a type of equilibrium, and your raiders should be able to sustain themselves without additional healing help. This way, healers can focus their attention on the tank and raid members with the Penetrating Cold debuff. This phase is a DPS race. Pop Bloodlust and burn the boss down before your raiders run out of health and mana. And that concludes the normal version of this encounter. Heroic mode is not much different conceptually, but there are a few key changes to the fight. 4 Nerubian burrowers are summoned at a time instead of 2, or 2 instead of 1 in 10 map. Nerubian burrowers gain Shadow Strike, an interruptible 8-second cast that will target a random player and deal 40,000 shadow damage if not stopped. Permafrost orbs will not respawn. The raid is limited to 6 orbs for the duration of the encounter. Leeching Swarm takes for 20% instead of 10%. And finally, Anub'Arak will continue to spawn Nerubian burrowers in phase 3. With 4 Nerubian burrowers spawning every set, it becomes increasingly necessary to run 3 tanks. One tank will be on Anub'Arak, and the other 2 will pick up 2 adds every time more burrowers spawn. Additionally, now that the burrowers have the ability Shadow Strike, it's important to delegate kicks and stun assignments to ensure a cast doesn't go off. Similarly to normal, place 2 permafrost spots down to the left and right of where the boss is tanked, and have the raid cleave down the first 4 burrowers before the next 4 spawn. Once the first 4 go down, the raid should focus full single target on the boss until phase 2. Once Anub'Arak burrows, DPS can use this time to DPS the remaining 4 adds down. In Heroic, your raid is allotted a maximum of 2 submerge phases before you run out of permafrost orbs. Some raids will have enough damage to not need to concern themselves with the second submerge phase. In either case, we don't want the permafrost placed down in phase 1, adjacent to where Anub'Arak is tanked, to expire. Instead, the raid needs to coordinate dropping frozen orbs in places around the room, far away from where Anub'Arak has been burrowed. The targeted raiders need to kite Anub'Arak as long as possible before running over a patch of frozen ground. This can be made easier by kiting Anub'Arak away right before he submerges, and by using Blessing of Protection to extend the time the pursued player can delay before running into a permafrost patch. If your raid expects to take 2 submerge phases, you are limited to using 2 permafrost orbs for each submerge phase. If your raid has enough DPS to push 30% in one submerge phase, you can use 4 permafrost orbs during phase 2. If, by some incident, you don't have enough orbs during a submerge phase, you can sacrifice raiders to impale, and battle res them afterwards if more time is needed to stall, with the limit here being the number of battle reses you have available. Note that when Anub'Arak emerges, threat does not reset. This means DPS can immediately attack the boss without worry of pulling threat. Once your raid manages to get to 30% and push into the final phase, it's hugely important to have Nature Resistance Totem to reduce leech damage, and small heals like Judgment of Light, Improved Leader of the Pact, and Healing Screen Totem. One or a combination of these small heals is enough to keep the raid alive at around 10% health. Non-tanks shouldn't need to be healed beyond these abilities. This way healers can focus their attention to tank damage and players with the Penetrating Cold debuff. However, healers will need to act quickly, as a single tick of the Penetrating Cold debuff will kill a raider at 10% health. Then, since Nerubian burrowers will continue spawning in hard mode, deciding whether to kill adds before more spawn or opting to ignore adds and burn the boss becomes increasingly delicate now that healers are having to juggle the health bars of 3 unique tanks. Ultimately, that decision will be context and raid dependent. Things like when you push into phase 3 relative to the add timer, or how much health the boss has remaining will influence this decision. One strategy to buy more time has your add tank stand outside of the permafrost and allow the burrowers to submerge. This alleviates some of the healing pressure and encourages single target DPS burn. Note, however, this is risky. If the boss doesn't die before adds emerge and a new set of adds spawn, your off tanks will struggle to live holding aggro on 4 adds each. Finally, it can be advisable for non-tanks to remove Power Word Fortitude and commanding Shout to reduce the amount of damage Anub'Arak heals due to leech when phase 3 begins. But this comes at the expense that the resting health pool of each player will be slightly lower once Leeching Swarm sets in, meaning penetrating cold targets will need slightly more healing in order to stay alive. If healers are comfortable but your raid lacks DPS, this might be a more sensible option. And that concludes Heroic Anub'Arak. If you stuck around this long and found these guides helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing. I'd love to keep doing more things like this, and having the support to do so really makes a difference. Thanks for watching.